We've got Bruno here at the Buyer's Choice, and today we're talking about radon gas. I love the story of how radon gas ended up in Manitoba and Winnipeg. You don't necessarily care as much.
Yeah.
But so correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially the glaciers came down and they dropped sediment on the way. And for some reason, we've got more sediment here in the Winnipeg region and south of Winnipeg than anywhere else in Canada.
Yes. How and why, I don't quite remember. Like I said, I don't care too much about the history, so I have a very selective memory.
Yeah.
So I decided to select and remember what means to have the radon. I completely forgot of how it got here, and even why there's so much deposit here. Like, where did these pieces of uranium came from?
Because so it's uranium
that
was brought down with the glaciers.
Yep.
And so what happens is the uranium is in the soil, and then when houses are built on top of it, it can leak up and through.
Yeah, so our soil, because we are built in clay, it's the old Manitoba gumbo that everyone likes to talk about, because there's so much water and so much dirt, and even when you just sometimes dig a hole in your yard, it doesn't smell the greatest.
Yeah.
So it all helps to cause the breakdown of the uranium a little bit more easy than other places.
Yeah. And so what we're learning a lot more recently is that with the technology, we're learning more and more about radon gas, and that it's essentially like seeping and leaching into homes, and it's cancer causing. Like there's issues with it and having it in homes. So you just tested my house. So we came in at 84. Which you've said is a good number.
It's a great number. So anything below 150, they are saying that you don't really need to worry about. It's even on a brand new house that has all the setup for the mitigation of radon, you're usually looking at about 60 to 70. I've seen some that are like 96 becquerels per square meter, per cubic meter, sorry. But at this level, you shouldn't really worry about. When you're looking at between 150 to 200, the recommendation is that in a 2-year time, you should definitely get a mitigation system installed in here. Anything between 200 and 600, you have 1 year of living in that space to put a mitigation system in place so you don't get any health issues.
Yeah.
And then above 600, they're like, do it as soon as possible.
Yeah, like
now, these are all recommendations. Of course, most people have lived here for a lot
hundreds
of time,
hundreds
of years, and it was never an issue. But now, because we know more, maybe some people passed away not really knowing what they passed away from.
Yeah.
Right. And it also affects different people in different ways.
Yeah.
Smokers, they will be more susceptible to radon and having lung cancer than non-smokers. I can't remember exactly what the percentage was, but I believe smokers was like 19% more likely to get lung cancer than a non-smoker.
Yeah, in the case of radon, or
in the case of radon,
Okay.
Yeah, and then from there on, it really depends. Each house will be a little bit different. We've been to houses that you could almost put your entire hand through a crack. You definitely have very high levels in there, but it doesn't mean that just because you have that crack in there, you will have those levels in there, because you may not have a deposit of uranium in there.
Because it's just pure luck
100%.
On where your house was built and what's underneath it. Now, you had mentioned briefly there about new homes. So let's talk about new homes for a moment. How are new homes built differently in terms of radon compared to older homes?
Yeah, so the new homes, the soil is more prepared to receive the house than back in the day they were. So back in the day, they would excavate the basement area. They would do compaction at the footings of the basement walls so they could build the foundation. The rest was just mostly dirt that hardly ever got compacted. Later on, like throughout the years, they started compacting, but there was never anything sealing off the soil between the concrete. So newer homes, they're properly compacted. There's inches of gravel that are now replacing the dirt. There's also a thick poly that seals it all off.
Okay.
So all the plumbing that goes through your concrete is also sealed at that polyplastic, and that polyplastic is creating a barrier between the soil and the concrete, and that's preventing a lot of the radon from infiltrating into the house.
And now what I also see in new build homes is, forgive my language, but there's a pipe
Yep.
that is just in the ground, and like I just call it it's a thingamajig, a radon thingamajig,
Yeah, well,
and it'll say like radon at the top. What is that for?
so that is so you can actually install a mitigation system, because we know that levels can fluctuate throughout the years, and sometimes you may not find anything for 5 years, and all of a sudden there's a big piece of uranium or something that happens within the soil or throughout the seasons that you can have some higher levels, or let's say the vapor barrier rips because of something happening in the soil. Now you can have radon levels coming into the house. Those pipes are there to help you removing the radon out of the ground. And it's not just a pipe through the slab. Most of the times there's actually a whole circuit of pipes and channels underneath the concrete.
Okay.
So you can imagine 3-inch pipes that are spread out through under the basement slab. Those pipes have holes in them, and there's just a cavity in there.
Okay.
Now, that pipe that goes through the slab, you can mount a fan in there. That fan will put an active ventilation, or will be creating vacuum under the slab, and it'll basically be sucking all the radon from under the slab before it comes into the house, and just dispense it outside.
Yeah. And now, so if somebody is in an older home and they've tested and the levels are high, what does mitigation look like, because that whole system isn't in place?
So it really depends how old the house is. If your concrete slab is completely deteriorated, you will have a different situation there, where you will have to do some work to the slab. Now I can speak to my house. I do live in a house that was built in 75. I had 1,200 becquerels per cubic meter in my house, so it's very high.
Yeah.
But I also didn't have a furnace. I only had baseboard heating in my house.
Right.
So I did the test. I installed a furnace in there, installed all the ducting, and with that I also installed an HRV. The HRV brought my levels down from 1,200 to 172.
So an HRV is what's circulating fresh air into the house, pulling out the old air. And so just in doing that, it's also pulling out the radon just through that system alone.
Not necessarily. So what the HRV is doing is actually putting positive pressure inside of the house. So now, instead of you running a bathroom fan that's actually sucking the radon from out of the ground, you have ventilation that's actually pushing air into the house.
Got it.
And that's forcing the radon and preventing it from actually entering the house.
Okay.
Now, the system is not perfect. The HRV is not running all the time. So I just did a 2-week run test on my house, and throughout the days I could see that levels would spike up and then come down, spike up and come down. So it really depends on the setting that you run your HRV on to prevent that. Now, it's a lot better to have that than not having anything. But there is proper mitigation systems that now can be used to prevent that from even coming in, and you can maybe run a combination. That's something that I'm thinking of doing at some point. Whenever I do basement renovations in my house, I'm going to install a mitigation system in there as well. So with that, a technician would go to different corners of the basement. They would drill a very small hole. It's like 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. In one corner, go to the opposite corner. They're actually gonna put vacuum in there. They can even just use a vacuum cleaner and start sucking air out of the one hole. They go to the other hole and they put a tool that measures the vacuum that's being created under the slab. So if they're able to see vacuum in there, they know that where their vacuum cleaner is a good spot to install that pipe that we see in most of the new builds. So they're going to put that in there, and then they're going to install a fan, and from there on you have a very similar system that you would have in the new builds.
Yeah.
You're just missing that whole system of
The
piping
network.
under the concrete.
Yeah. I've seen it in probably 2 houses that I've shown, where I've seen the mitigation system, you know, with the pipe and the fan that's pulling it out and then it's exhausting outside.
Yeah. We don't see it very often, and even if you do have high levels in your house and you have good basement windows. Like my house, my basement windows, they don't open. So I couldn't really do much. But if you go there and you open and ventilate your house for a few minutes a day, you are going to have lower levels. But as soon as winter hits, you're running your bathroom fans all the time and you never open your windows in the basement or even the entire house. You just like quickly come in and out. We try to lose as little heat as possible from the house. Now you're just creating that environment that will attract or will pull more radon out of the soil, and now your house is just filled with it and it's not getting vented out.
Yeah.
So it's not that we are obligated to install those systems, but we should do that just because of the way we have to live here in Manitoba.
Yeah.
If this was a much warmer place, if we were in Texas even, it wouldn't be as scary.
Yeah.
Also, having basement is something that really causes a lot of the issues. If we didn't have basements, most of the houses would have much lower levels than we do now.
Yeah, because it's just the depth at which we dig and we put basements here, which is really interesting because, the further south you go, past the border, they don't have basements.
Exactly.
And so they probably don't even have to worry about this and think about it in the same way, whether or not that sediment made it down there.
It did.
Okay.
It did. Even Texas, they like... You can look up in the internet, there are like maps of radon levels. The further north you go, the more red it gets. But even in Texas, they do find higher levels in some areas more than others.
Yeah.
And whenever they do find that, it's in houses that actually have a basement.
Interesting.
If it's just a grade on beam or if it's a slab on grade, usually they don't see much. But whenever there is a house with a basement down there, they will also find radon. Of course, it's not as often as here. Like Manitoba, we find radon in 19% to the houses. I think it's a little bit higher because every house that I tested had some levels. Where the rest of Canada, they're saying that, I can't remember, I think it was 7 or 9% of the houses will have it. So even Manitoba is a lot higher than the rest of Canada. And the further south you go, less will be as well.
Yeah. Very interesting. So if you have any other questions about radon gas, what you can do about it, should you be worried about it, feel free to comment below. Reach out to us with any questions. We're here to help you along in your journey and keep you and your home healthy and safe.